Well, hello. This demonstration that I'd like to create for you is the basic techniques that are involved in creating a slab bowl. As I get organized for this, I like to put all my tools together, everything that I need, so I don't have to run all over the place and look for a tool or a piece of material that I might otherwise need during the creation of this said project. So as I begin here, let's outline a little bit about what it is we're going to use. I have a piece of paper towel as a tool, and I'll fill you in on that later. I have a plaster mold. This is a hump mold in this case. It is solid plaster. Okay, that's a hump mold. I have a block of clay that is relatively thick. Well, thick. It's about an inch or so thick. It's a little thicker in some places, but this is a block of clay that I will roll out to a desired thickness, subsequently laying it over the plaster mold. I have a paring knife, just a standard paring knife from the kitchen that I will use as a trimming tool. I have a couple of wooden sticks. These are otherwise known as meter sticks, a meter stick cut in half. So the thickness of the meter stick in this case, you can use any pair of wooden sticks for this process, but the meter stick in this case provides me with an ideal thickness that I like to have when I'm working with a slab of clay and making it into a bowl or a plate, anything of that nature. So it's more about the thickness. It's not the meter stick itself, although that does provide me with some measuring capability if I wanted to use that, and I can use the standard in inches and quarters and so forth, or I can use that in centimeters and millimeters if I chose to. But more importantly, we're dealing with the thickness, so we're going to have a slab that is meter stick thick when we're done. And we obviously need two of them, and you'll see why. And I also have a rolling pin. This is solid wood. This is what I will use to roll out this block of clay into a meter stick thick slab of clay that will be laid over the plaster mold when I'm all done. Okay, so let's begin. I'm going to set a couple things aside, and I'll visit them a little bit later as I need them. Anything that I don't need, I'm going to put aside, put out of my way. All right, so I have my meter sticks in place, my block of clay, and a rolling pin. So what I can do to start thinning this out is I can gently throw my block of clay a little bit side to side, and this is going to thin out my slab just a little bit, so I have less to do when I'm rolling it. Now, what is important to consider is, in this case, I'm using a round plaster mold. That tells me that as I work with my block of clay, I need to create a slab that is going to approximate the size of that particular mold. So in this case, I need something that's round, so I want to make sure that as I'm stretching my block of clay, that I do so in both directions. Now, also worthy of note is as I throw my block of clay, I'm doing so by picking up and turning. I pick it up and I turn it, so that as I work this slab, I'm changing directions and applying even stress on the clay each time that I throw it in a different direction. Okay, so as I've thinned that out a little bit, I can now take my rolling pin, and as I roll back and forth, I'm going to roll that a little bit this way, and then I'm going to pick up my slab and I'm going to turn it and flip it. This is like cooking a steak on the grill. You flip it and turn it. I do not want to roll. When I use a rolling pin in this fashion, I do not want to apply all the stress and the pressure on exclusively one side of that slab of clay. I want to roll, and then I'm going to flip and turn. As I roll, I'm going to flip and turn. Okay, just like grilling a steak. You don't grill it only from one side, you grill it on both sides. So after a few minutes of grilling on one side, you're going to turn and flip that steak so it's grilled on the other side. You want to cook it evenly all the way through. In this same fashion, we're going to thin out this slab. We're rolling it out evenly from both sides. And here you can see that my rolling pin is prevented from going any thinner than that meter stick is in thickness. So if you keep that in mind, if I did not have the meter sticks in place and I applied the rolling pin to this slab of clay, I could roll that as thin as I want to. I could make that like a tortilla or like a crepe, and it would be too thin to work with at that point. So, in this case, I know that I want something meter stick thick, so I keep my meter sticks in place and I roll gently across that. Alright, I'm now done with my rolling pin. Set that aside. I'm also done with my meter sticks. I'm going to set those aside. So now my next thing is, I need to bring in my plaster mold. Now, what I want you to notice is that this surface, the top side, happens to be free of texture. It's nice and smooth. The bottom side happens to have a little canvas surface to it. I can choose to use either side against the mold if I wish. In this case, I'll probably use the smooth side against the mold, in that as it's drying, I can smooth out the outer side with a damp sponge. Okay, that'll be easy enough to do. I don't want to be altering the inside surface. Now, something you need to keep in mind when you're working with a mold such as this. Plaster is porous by nature. If I were to spray some water on here, you can see that that plaster will absorb that moisture. So, that being the case, plaster is going to naturally draw moisture from the clay. Clay does two things as it sets out. It dries and it shrinks. So this slab of clay, if I were to measure this, and this were a finished measurement, I could say that this slab of clay is 11 inches wide. Well, by the time it's all done, it's going to be approximately 10 inches wide. This clay has a little over a 10% rate of shrinkage, so we're going to lose a little more than an inch there. Now, because clay shrinks, and I'm using a plaster mold, and plaster is drawing moisture out of it, if I were using, I want to use a barrier. In this case, my barrier is simply going to be a piece of paper towel. That's all I'm going to use. It's very simple. I could use cornstarch. That's going to be a little bit messy. A piece of paper towel is an easy, convenient thing to use in this case. So, as I'm going to lay this on here, I'm taking the smooth side, and I'm just gently going to lay that onto my mold. Get that kind of centered on there, and I can see where the bottom, so to speak, of my mold is, and then I have clay all the way around that. So now I'm going to start to form that so I can trim it a little bit. Alright, so I have my slab, I've laid it over the mold has a barrier on it. If I were using anything that's a smooth surface, such as plastic or glass or metal, I would make sure to have a barrier on there as well, because those are surfaces that clay will stick to. Clay will not stick to plaster or fabric or paper, so it's okay to use those, but just knowing that you do want to have a barrier if you're putting a piece of clay over something, so that the clay doesn't shrink and constrict against the form that you're using. So now here, I can see that I've got some excess clay. So in this case, what I would like to do is I'm going to go ahead, and where I know that I have excess, I'm going to take my knife and I'm going to cut away a little bit at a time. I'm going to cut away the clay that I know is excess clay. And I'm going to set that aside. I just want to start by removing clay that is just going to cause me a little bit of problem as I work. Not a lot of problem, but it's just kind of an obstacle to working, in a more ideal manner. Okay? So now I've got something that's a bit more ideal. I'm pretty close to the rim of my pot, and what I can also do is I can set this up. I'm going to grab a banding wheel. This is an elevated banding wheel in this case, and I'm going to set my project up here so I have a little bit more height to work off of. And here, just being able to get my clay wall over the rim of my mold, I can see where that's at, and I know that I have that in a proper fashion. Now, with being able to turn this, I can easily trim off some of the excess of my rim of my bowl and make that much more uniform. Okay? So I might wait until the clay stiffens up a little bit to do that, and that's okay to do that as well. So if I were to make just an ever so subtle line, okay, I'm going to hold my knife as steady as I can, and I'm just going to touch the surface of the clay with the tip of my knife, and this is just to outline or delineate the clay that I want to remove from my pot. And I can see that that line doesn't go all the way around, so I can go ahead and I can push that knife blade in and just slice through. I do not want to saw. This is not even though the knife has a serrated edge, I don't want to think of my piece of clay as a steak. I'm not sawing back and forth. I just want to slice through, and that gives me a much more uniform rim surface area. It gets rid of a little bit of the excess. So I could take that, and I want to make sure that I'm obviously not cutting off too much. So as I slice a little bit off of this side, that helps to even that out over there. And I can slice a little bit over here as well. And ultimately, this is going to give me a uniform rim when I'm done. So, in essence, this is where I'm at for today. Now, I could decide that I may want a little bit of texture on the outside of that bowl. I might want some stamps. I can take a damp sponge, and remember I had a little bit of the canvas texture there, and just with a damp sponge, I can work on this to smooth out my outside surface before I apply any texture or patterns to it. And you want to be careful not to gouge your clay, even with a fingernail, with a tool that you might be using. I gouged it a little bit there. I can blend that back in and smooth it out if that happens. That's okay. So here I am. I'm just smoothing this out with a damp sponge. And just making that surface much nicer and much smoother. And I can take, if I were to do some texture on there, I have a piece of lace that I used earlier. I can take that piece of lace and I can use a little roller and roll that lace pattern in, just so I have a little bit of variation in my surface area. I don't want to go crazy because I'm still going to trim some of the rim. You can see how nice and how easily that works. I might take and vary that, change the direction of the lace. And just give my surface a little different look. And that's all it amounts to applying a little bit of texture and dressing up your surface area of your pots. Just gives it a little different look. Not necessary to do, but it's nice. You can have a little fun with it. And if you're giving that bowl, that dish to somebody who happens to like lace, they like something with that nice pattern, then they might appreciate that even more than somebody who otherwise doesn't. Okay? So, let's take this and pick it up. I'm going to turn that over, set that aside, and you can see here from the top side the slab of clay is loose from the mold, but I don't want to leave this sit out of the mold just yet. I could, but I want this to stiffen up a little bit, let's say for a few hours. In our case, I may do this overnight. I'll put this in a plastic bag and I'll let that stiffen up overnight, and tomorrow I'll be able to come and I'll be able to trim my rim so it's level, it's more uniform, and I'll be able to clean that up nicely. So this, in essence, is how you make a slab bowl. You can see that as this would dry, the mold itself would remove from the slab, from what I made of clay, and then I'd be able to clean that up and finish it up. And making a slab bowl is relatively easy in that respect. Just need a piece of clay, some basic tools, something to use as a mold or a form, and you're good to go. So, in class you'll be able to ask questions or leave me comments on YouTube. So, thanks for watching.